Thanks so much for coming back to our next edition of Econ Talks. Of course, migration remains a really topical point as we move ahead with this COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, Gareth, what are the latest numbers actually showing?
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, you read the numbers that are coming through managed isolation and quarantine, and the government's put, I think, more than 40,000 people through the process since late March. Big numbers, and a lot of talk about the sort of brain gain, or returning New Zealanders, and just what that means in terms of both the labour market, but also demand for housing, of course, through the economy. What's interesting is if you look at the estimates from Stats NZ around net migration. Yes, we had big inflows in the March quarter, sort of as COVID hit internationally and people rushed to get back. But when you look at the June quarter, they estimate that the net inflow of migrants coming into New Zealand was only around 800 over the last 3 months. So, look, June is normally a pretty weak quarter anyway. But if you had that sort of figure going on for a year, you can see that our net migration numbers would fall away from the 40 to 50,000 that we were experiencing before COVID came along to potentially under 10,000 as a result of those flows. And basically the reason is that we've had people leaving the country again. So they might come to New Zealand to visit a sick or a dying relative and go to the funeral and then head back overseas again, back to Australia or wherever. You've also had, of course, foreigners who have been within New Zealand, migrants who'd come here and were on a working holiday, for example. They've struggled to get home initially, but there have been repatriation flights over the last few months that have meant there has been a steady outflow of people leaving New Zealand as well. So I guess the key message is there, don't get distracted by simply the numbers coming through quarantine, because that really does overstate the sort of strength of the inflow into New Zealand.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a massive difference from 33 odd thousand in the March quarter to 800 in the June. That's a significant reduction. I mean, what does that mean for the building and construction sector, but also housing? Because we had a big influx, but now if we don't moving forward, that should soften activity, or at least put or withdraw some of the pressure underneath housing. You'd expect. Is that right to think?
Yeah, look, I mean, one of the difficulties we have with the migration flows at the moment is we're not sure where the New Zealanders, when they're coming back into the country, where they're necessarily settling. Is it all in Auckland? Probably not. New Zealanders tend to spread themselves around the country and move back, one, where the work is, but also back to where they sort of may have grown up or come from initially. So probably likely to be spread around the country, but definitely if you're seeing that sort of population growth slowing over coming quarters, then the sort of near-term stimulus for the housing market from the rush of people coming back in is not going to last forever. And that could well coincide, of course, slowing population growth with a significant slowdown or downturn in the labour market and jobs numbers as well in coming months as the government support rolls off there.
And that labour market, that wider sort of consideration is going to be quite important, of course, with, if we're not bringing in, if our migration is falling, that's a lot of skilled migrants who aren't coming in to fill jobs that New Zealand has traditionally relied on overseas workers to do, some of those particularly skilled work in machinery and the horticulture sector, of course. And I guess for talking to people across the country, that's going to be quite a pinch point in the next year if we don't get people coming in, where there are going to be a number of jobs that, sure, we have Kiwis who are unemployed, but they don't have the skills immediately to be able to do those roles. So in many regards, you're going to have a little bit of a dip in production and output, aren't you, with sort of fewer people?
Yeah, it's all very well looking at the sort of projections of the unemployment rate heading up to over 6% or 8% and saying, well, there's a pool of available workers there that could move into agriculture or horticulture or some of those other skilled roles that you're talking about. But it's not necessarily a given that the skills of those people who've become unemployed are going to fit into the roles that are available. And so there will be, I think there is real concern, particularly in some of those provincial areas and specific sectors such as construction and infrastructure, about just how much appropriate labour resources will be available and whether they're going to be able to continue working and producing at the sort of levels and rates that they would like to.
Yeah, some huge challenges, particularly around the labour market, but also, like you say, housing before that, and within labour market, construction, maybe agri as well. Some of those skilled machinist sort of operations, and that is going to be quite a pinch point, particularly for different parts of the country. Now, construction, of course, pretty widespread across New Zealand, but when you think of some of those more technical roles for the primary sector, concentrations in some parts of the South Island and on sort of the east coast of the North Island does make you worry a little bit about where the economic output goes next year. Yes, there'll be a pool of people, but they probably won't be as efficient at doing the jobs, or just simply won't have the skills. So, from a labour force point of view, I think there's a lot of work to go on to do now to get people as work ready for those roles as possible, noting that you might have to sort of, I guess, wear a year of lower activity. Big challenges are moving ahead, though, and again, we're keeping an eye on that. I know that one of our economist team had a look last week at the travellers that were still in New Zealand that were doing a little bit of work. Did focus on some of those areas that did have more sort of seasonal work, the Bay of Plenty, as well as Marlborough, and so that was encouraging just for the near term, but you'd expect that will start to flow away after that. So look, we'll keep watching that one. The migration numbers keep getting revised, and we'll try to keep a handle on what they do next. Thanks, Gareth. Always good to chat. We'll catch you again on our next version of Econ Talks soon. Cheers.